Hi, I'm David Freudberg, host of Humankind. I've always been fascinated by the human voice, which experts say is as unique to each person as their fingerprint. In these podcasts, we celebrate the human voice in all its wonderfully diverse forms, young and old, different accents, and cultural contexts. Writers sometimes struggle to find their own voice, but you can kind of tell when someone is speaking from a place of authenticity and integrity. That's when I most love listening to voices. Thank you for listening. Humankind is produced in association with WGBH Boston and supported by the Humankind Program Fund and a grant from the Henry Luce Foundation.
It's saying everything you see is real to some extent, but there's something deeper beneath that, another reality that is below your mind's good and bad, light and dark. So there's a world beyond the polarities.
The ancient Chinese wisdom of Lao Tsu is refreshed for modern readers by a magnificent recent translation. You're listening to Humankind. I'm David Freudberg. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step is perhaps the most recognizable quote attributed to Lao Tsu, the ancient master of Chinese wisdom. His famous Tao Te Ching is a slim volume of 81 brief poetic passages compiled about 2,000 years ago. It brims with forgotten truths that will stop you in your tracks. A calm voice of sanity that our perplexed modern life cries out to hear again. Next to the Bible, Tao Te Ching is the world's most widely translated book. Almost anyone is sure to be rewarded by accompanying Lao Tsu on his long journey. For decades, it has captivated Jonathan Starr in Princeton, New Jersey.
Well, I've been practicing yoga and various forms of meditation for many years. And I came across what I thought was a beautiful version of the Tao by Jane English and Ji Fu Feng. The reason that version was so good, it wasn't just a piece of paper. It was an experience. There were pictures, calligraphy, so you were kind of brought into that world.
Beautiful black and white photography.
Right. It's just the whole feel of it was well done. And so I'd read it with my girlfriend, and we'd try to get into the emotional quality of it. And I just started reading it. This was back maybe 20, 30 years ago. I was intrigued by it because I understood part of it, but a lot of it I just didn't understand.
Kind of shrouded in mystery, isn't it?
Yeah, it was this kind of mystical feeling, and I was trying to really infuse it with emotions, but if you don't really understand something, it's hard to kind of synchronize it with the emotions. So the fact that I really couldn't understand it led me to explore a little more.
Live in accordance with the nature of things. Build your house on solid ground. Keep your mind still. When giving, be kind. When speaking, be truthful. When ruling, be just. When working, be one-pointed. When acting, remember, timing is everything.
Tao Te Ching is so rich in timeless insight, it drew Jonathan Starr back to reread and ponder it over and over again. The original text was in a very ancient Chinese dialect that long predates the Chinese spoken today. And the English translations varied, all bursting with meaning, some sounding over-formal, others more lyrical. But the problem was the different versions conveyed sometimes substantially different meanings.
The more versions I got, the more it was like, wait, what is the Tao? What is it? And so it was clarifying in one way, but the confusion. So after I had built up 6 Taos, 10, 20, 30, 40.
You read 40 translations?
40. And then it was like, wait a second. So that was the process. I mean,
But what drew you to it, even through these various doorways, all leading to presumably the same thing? What was the magnet? What was the draw for you?
The same thing that pretty much motivated me for everything was like, what is the truth? What is this reality we're living in? Because I had been steeped in yoga at the time. I probably was living in an ashram. And, this whole quest for what is the truth, who am I, what is this universe, what is life. And so this book gave me some hint or some vision into that. Like these sages who were describing this world, where were they seeing it from? We live our lives, where are we living from? Where were these sages? So that became it wasn't an intellectual, it was part of a spiritual quest. And the Tao seemed to be one of the earliest texts that I stumbled upon and felt there was something there. More like it was a hint. They never really told you. Like a lot of it sounded like Zen koans kind of pointing to the truth, but never really, explicating it in a clear manner.
Is that because the truth is by nature mysterious and hard to be bluntly direct about?
Well, that's the point. I was my mind wanted to grasp onto some truth that I could, and the whole Tao was kind of saying, hey, the very first line, the Tao that can't be told is not the eternal Tao. I mean, right from the beginning, they were saying, hey, you're not going to get it. We're going to point you towards it. We're going to show you it, but you're not going to. The mind wants to grab it. You want something. Then I finally learned the Chinese. I really wanted to grab hold of the truth. And the mistake that we make is to rely too much upon the mind, to do everything. The one thing it can't do is show us that reality which is beyond the mind, which cannot be codified by the mind.
So what is the vehicle, the entranceway to the truth, if not through the mind?
It's sort of through your being. It's sort of through we could say it's through your heart on one level, but the only way the truth can be known is to be the truth. You can't, the way to live life is to live life, not know about life. So it's a kind of a suspension of the mind. It's a kind of a primordial sense that you've always had. Before, when you were a child, a young baby, you had this intimate connection with life. You didn't have to know it. You didn't have a mind. Your essential being is already connected with life. So it's not about necessarily getting rid of the mind, but not relying upon the mind to get you where you already are. That's kind of the paradox that we live in. We're already one with the Tao, but we're always looking for it.
It's kind of like a fish in the middle of the sea saying, where's the water?
You're right. It's taken for granted. You're one with it. You couldn't even be a fish if there was no water. And that's the path that most people are on. They're constantly looking for what is already here. And the thing is just to recognize what is already here.
Jonathan Starr remained deeply fascinated by the powerful, enduring message expressed in Tao Te Ching, but he was never able to reconcile the confusing discrepancies found among the dozens of English translations he consulted. So Jonathan decided the only way to solve this puzzle would be to learn the ancient Chinese language, study the original text, and produce his own translation. It took him 12 years. But the fruit of this labor is a truly magnificent English version, for me the very most resonant one among many, many that I've read. Lao Tsu devotes a lot of his text to characterizing the behavior of someone who is sagely, who has wisdom. He comments that their power often lies in the discipline of self-restraint, of acting without ego. What is Lao Tsu teaching us here?
Well, shall I read a quick verse on that? The masters of this ancient path are mysterious and profound. Their inner state baffles all inquiry. Their depths go beyond all knowing. Thus, despite every effort, we can only tell of their outer signs, deliberate, as if treading over the stones of a winter brook, watchful, as if meeting danger on all sides, reverent, as if receiving an honored guest, selfless, like a melting block of ice, pure, like an uncarved block of wood, accepting, like an open valley. I think he's trying to show us a vision of another possibility, another place from which we can live our lives, another human possibility. So perhaps Lao Tsu was describing someone who's not only enlightened, but who has embodied that enlightenment, who has able to translate that enlightenment. I think that's what he was actually looking at, someone who has embodied it and translated that Tao through into their own life. It's a flowing, beautiful, it's a wonder to see people like that.
And when you're in the presence of it, it's life changing, because it's a glimpse into a possibility that we ordinarily don't see, and that sometimes we may talk ourselves out of even believing is possible.
That's where it becomes a problem, because most people don't feel they're good enough, or they're not worthy enough, or they haven't done the right, or they don't have the right stuff. So that becomes a small and maybe a large impediment.
Very few of us are able to see ourselves with great accuracy. Insecurities almost inevitably cloud the image in the mirror. We may undervalue our capacity for personal discovery and development, the very possibilities that animate human life and make it worthwhile. We are all capable of growing in self-awareness.
The first thing is you need a bona fide desire. Most people don't want to wake up. They just, if I offered you enlightenment or your world as it is, most people would take. So, if you have the desire or the longing, that's the major shift that's already taken place. The block is a lot of people they don't think they're good enough. They don't think they're special enough for enlightenment. Enlightenment is your own nature. It's your own birthright. You're already living it.
It's your own true self.
Yeah, so a lot of people don't feel they're good enough or worthy enough. That's the first thing. You don't need to be any way to, understand your own nature. You don't necessarily have to be a monk in India or a celibate or a vegetarian. You don't have to be any of that. If that's natural to you, then fine, but that's not required. It really comes down to accepting yourself as you are, even with all your flaws at the beginning.
So much of this philosophy is a study in contrasts and in opposites. As one verse put it, everyone recognizes beauty only because of ugliness. So what do we learn by paying attention to opposites?
The mind thinks in opposites. This is good, this is bad. The world of duality, the world of polarity. And that's a great way for the mind to function, to compare and contrast. But the Tao is essentially beyond that. It could be a subtle way to say, hey, embrace it all. The high is you, the low is you. The beauty is you, the ugliness is you.
Two sides of the same coin?
Yes. In other words, if I'm trying to grab only beauty, if I'm trying to only grab one thing, if the Tao is everything, and I'm trying to grab only the positive experiences, I'm going to try to run away from all my negative experiences. But that's a mistake, because those negative experiences are also me. Pleasure is me. Pain is me. And so it's a very subtle teaching to embrace the parts that your mind and your ego wants to run away from. It's no one wants to hear this. Your ego doesn't want to hear this. The strategy is, let me just get the pleasure. The pain, I don't want anything. But it's the actual running away from the pain, is the running away from yourself. You're the totality. And it's a very subtle teaching. Most people won't pick it up on that level. But It's a subtle call to embrace who you are in your wholeness.
We're talking with Jonathan Starr, who has produced a masterly English translation of Tao Te Ching, the treasure of ancient Chinese wisdom by Lao Tsu. You're listening to Humankind. I'm David Freudberg. For more information about Lao Tsu and to download an audio copy of this segment, The Way of Tao, please visit humanmedia.org. Jonathan Starr first encountered the Tao Te Ching through a text rendered by Jiafu Feng and the stirring nature photography of Jane English. For an earlier program on Lao Tsu's wisdom, I met Jane English, then living in Berkeley, California. Although Lao Tsu's book is about 2,000 years old, she found it freshly relevant to today's challenges.
I think it's not only applicable, I think it's essential. It's what might save us. Because we're still in nature. We all have natural bodies. We come in nature. It's easy to forget that the human being hasn't changed so much. All this technology that's happened the last few centuries is just like a second in time. And the whole long history, the background, where we come from. I mean, Lao Tsu is fairly recent in terms of our evolution. So it's still, the wisdom then is still real wisdom for us now. I think the thing that's real important right now is synthesizing, of bringing together our ability to make distinctions, to separate things, to divide and define, which is what underlies technology. That's what we really need. That's what I learned in my training as a physicist, was how to make distinctions and how to be very precise and measure things and quantify things. What we need is a balance of that with this larger, more global sense of where all this comes from, the place that you can't name, because he names words are distinctions. They're separating, and that's why you can't name the one, the whole. I mean, even though we try to call it things like the one and the whole and the Tao, we all fumble around trying to name it. But we're aware of something that underlies, precedes, contains, or permeates all these little things that we talk about.
There is no formal religion called Taoism. It's more a school of philosophy based on going with the flow of life, attaining a delicate balance as found in nature, following the heart. According to Jonathan Starr, the Taoist view emerged a few hundred years after the birth of Buddha.
I think the Tao was written somewhere between 200 BC, somewhere to 200 AD, sort of in that whole area. That's when, Chuang-Tzu and Confucius and a lot of the framework for the Chinese philosophy was laid out.
So having studied this in depth, what's your answer to the riddle of who Lao Tsu was?
Well, according to my clarity, for whatever I reached, I thought Lao Tzu was just a name given to, a compilation of different texts. I think there were probably several authors. The whole thing was to try to give this text some legitimacy. They needed to have a name. They needed a sage. But my feeling is that it was probably several hundred years of compilation,
Are there other scholars who believe that there was an actual guy named Lao Tsu who walked around?
Not too many. I mean, it's more like it's a nice little myth. The story is that he wrote it in one sitting, that he was leaving the city and the gatekeeper wanted him to write, so he comes down from his ox cart and he spends 2-3 hours and he writes the whole thing. And that's just, that's a bit of a fairy tale, but it's, it makes for a nice picture. I can't make a picture of, 10 different sages where a text evolved over 200 years. There's no picture. We want a nice, we need a nice story, we need a picture, we need a sage, but no one really takes it seriously.
So this is a strange question, but does it make a difference whether there was a single guy named Lao Tsu?
No, it doesn't make a difference. I mean, it's a representation of the vision that sages had during that time.
The name Lao Tsu has been translated as simply old man, and the identity of the sage or sages who authored Tao Te Ching has disappeared into the mists of time. But one theme from the book that remains as topical today as when it was written millennia ago is the folly of politicians. Jonathan Starr, from his translation, quotes Lao Tsu's guidance on how leaders should govern.
The great ruler speaks little, and his words are priceless. He works without self-interest and leaves no trace. When all is finished, the people say, it happened by itself. This is a true selfless leader. When his intention is for true benefit, it's not about I did anything or vote for me. It's really about empowering people. They did it. We did it. It happened.
And how many members of Congress today can really be described as selfless people?
Well, they should all read the Tao. That should be, when they come to Congress, they should be a copy in their seats. But no, we're completely different. This is more of a, when you have to vote and there's money in politics, it's a completely different. But it was very intriguing when these sages were actually guiding. We're talking about the benevolent dictator. We're talking about a true kind of leader who truly has the self-interest of others, doesn't really see a difference between him or herself and others. So there's just this desire to serve selflessly, not to take. And so this whole world is given to us. The Tao is creating everything. It never says, can I get? It's always giving. So when a leader embodies that truth, I wouldn't even say they're a leader. They're more like a friend, but that's the true kind of leadership that transforms.
To become learned, gain daily. To obtain Tao, reduce daily. Reduce and reduce again until all action is reduced to non-action. Then no one is left. Nothing is done. Yet nothing is left undone. One who gives freely and without attachment gets a full life in return. One who gives with the secret hope of getting is merely engaged in business. Truly, they neither give nor receive any of the treasure from this world below heaven.
Here's a section that seems to me kind of the quintessence of Taoism. The most yielding thing in the world will overcome the most rigid. The most empty thing in the world will overcome the most full. Does that ring true for you?
I think that in many ways, Taoism is a kind of a soft philosophy. It's not about, use your mind and intention and I can accomplish everything. It's definitely pointing us towards another part of our nature, which is soft, which is fluid. I think, to me, actually, that is one of the hallmarks of what Taoism is about this softer approach to life, this bending approach, as opposed to a hard steel, uber masculine approach to, things. So there is a certain feminine quality to that. The ideas, the honoring of water as an element, how it wears away rocks over time. There's a certain softness.
And a kind of patience built into the process, that abruptly overpowering something maybe in some cases really is called for, but there are many other times when the gradual patience of love conquers all.
It's really quite in tune with what is emerging now in the West. This is from verse 76. When life begins, we are tender and weak. When life ends, we are stiff and rigid. All things, the grass, the trees, while living are soft and pliant, in death are dry and brittle. So the soft and supple are the companions of life, while the stiff and unyielding are the companions of death. An army that cannot yield will suffer defeat. A tree that cannot bend will crack in the wind. Thus, by nature's own decree, the hard and strong are defeated, while the soft and gentle are triumphant.
Kind of the opposite of our macho warrior approach.
Exactly. Even this uber masculine approach to spirituality about meditating 10 hours a day, and it's definitely a whole other. It's not comfortable for a lot of people who are used to this, this mental approach of intention, which has got us a lot of great things in the West. This whole, the whole revolutions and computer and industrial revolution, but it can't get us and it can't get us, beyond that physical dimension. Only this soft, gentle heart approach can.
We can't control our way to that which is beyond control.
No, we have to. It's more of acceptance. It's more of an allowing than a imposition of our will. And again, no one. This is the hardest thing for, the ego wants to do it. They want to meditate. They want a method. It's very, very disconcerting for someone who's so used to that approach and so successful with a mental orientation towards life.
Let me ask you to read one last passage from your brilliant translation into English of the ancient Chinese text, Tao Te Ching, from verse 50.
Again and again, men come in with birth and go out with death. 1 in 3 are followers of life. 1 in 3 are followers of death. And those just passing from life to death also number 1 in 3. But they all die in the end. Why is this so? Because they clutch to life and cling to this passing world. I hear that one who lives by his own truth is not like this. He walks without making footprints in this world. Going about, he does not fear the rhinoceros or tiger. Entering a battlefield, he does not fear sharp weapons. For in him the rhino can find no place to pitch its horn, the tiger no place to fix its claw, the soldier no place to thrust his blade. Why is this so? Because he dwells in that place where death cannot enter.
Jonathan Starr, who spent 12 years studying ancient Chinese and has rendered a superb translation of Lao Tsu's masterpiece of wisdom known as Tao Te Ching. You're listening to Humankind. I'm David Freudberg. Studio recording by Antonio Oliart-Rose. Editorial assistance from Ken Rogers, Kathy Graham, Mark Kilstein, and Bond Collard. Webmaster Brian K. Johnson. Special thanks to Laura Carlo, David Hopkins of the Princeton University Broadcast Center, and to Tony Buck. Our program is presented by Human Media in association with Connie Goldman Productions. Program development provided by Shart Media.
To purchase a CD copy of this program, please call 1-800-5LISTEN. That's 1-800-5LISTEN. Or visit our website, where you can also obtain an audio download of this and our other programs and can hear selected episodes free. You can access free written materials related to this program as well. Our web address is humanmedia.org. Again, if you'd like to purchase a CD copy of Humankind by phone, please call 1-800-5LISTEN, and our web address is humanmedia.org.
This segment, part 1 of The Way of Lao Tsu, is Humankind Program number 229.
The executive producer is David Freudberg. This is Humankind.
To hear more episodes of Humankind, you can subscribe to our free podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or your preferred podcast player. A new episode each week. The podcast title is Humankind on Public Radio.
And if you enjoy this program, be sure to leave us a kind review at iTunes and Stitcher. If you want to support the program, please visit humanmedia.org. And at the top of the homepage, click on How You Can Help. Again, our web address is humanmedia.org. Thanks.
Hi, I'm David Freudberg, host of Humankind. I've been thinking a lot lately about civility. Of course, basic politeness and exercising good manners is essential, but I think civility, real civility, goes deeper. It means to choose our words carefully and thoughtfully in non-hurtful ways. It means to be respectful of how another person sees the world even when we heartily disagree. And to maintain a sense of humility, because as a wise friend of mine used to say, we could always be wrong. These are lofty goals which I practice imperfectly, of course, but that's the tone we strive for in these programs. Thank you for listening. Humankind is produced in association with WGBH Boston and supported by the Humankind Program Fund and a grant from the Henry Luce Foundation.
I need continual reminding to return to simplicity, not to complicate my life, to take time for being in my everyday life. Because when I fail to return to the simplicity of Taoism, I get caught up. I get lost, I get bewildered by the modern world.
How the ageless wisdom of Lao Tsu can help us to appreciate the abundance of a simpler, less harried life. You're listening to Humankind. I'm David Freudberg. Jonathan Starr in Princeton, New Jersey, has a special talent. He's unusually gifted at taking spiritually inspired literature written long ago in a foreign tongue and making it elegantly accessible to contemporary English speakers. The ideas expressed in the texts he chooses, including Lao Tsu's Chinese masterwork, Tao Te Ching, are often subtle and hard to convey, and much could get lost in rendering it from one language and culture to another. So to carry the meaning faithfully, Jonathan Starr views his task as a spiritual exercise.
In terms of my translation style, and I do this with Rumi and even when I translated Shakespeare, the point is to get into the space of where these sages were seeing the world from. So if I go from Chinese to English, that's one thing. I translate the words, but you go from Chinese into your own vision, and then from that vision, which is similar or shared or in resonance with the original vision, then you write the poem from that vision. So the English translations carries that conviction. It carries that connection to life. A lot of scholars, they go from Chinese and they look up a book and they know some language and they translate to English. And so they say the thing that gets lost in spiritual translation is the poetry. But what also gets lost is the spirit.
The inner is foundation of the outer.
From Jonathan Starr's translation of Tao Te Ching.
The still is the master of the restless. The sage travels all day, yet never leaves his inner treasure. Though the views are captivating and beg attention, he remains calm and uninvolved. Tell me, does the lord of a great empire go out begging for rice? One who seeks his treasure in the outer world is cut off from his own roots. Without roots, he becomes restless. Being restless, his mind is weak. And with a mind such as this, he loses all command below heaven.
People who resonate with this kind of wisdom are often drawn to develop spiritual awareness in their own lives. Most of the great religious traditions contain many gems of knowledge that can nourish and guide seekers. But in a world with so many conflicting messages, where do people searching for deep knowledge look? It's a question Jonathan Starr has grappled with.
The best possible thing you can do is find someone who's already in that state.
Find a teacher to guide you.
Find a teacher to be with, to talk to, because, again, as long as you're relying upon your own mind to get you there, to read the books, to put forth the intention, to do whatever it needs, you're already going to be misled. But when you're with a teacher who's in that state, it starts to vibrate. It's like two strings of a guitar. One's vibrating. That to me is the crucial component. And there are more and more people. They don't have to be a guru or a teacher. It could just be being in the company of people who are either in the state or moving towards the state.
And old Lao Tsu describes the characteristics of someone whose wisdom is worth learning from.
The sage embraces the one and becomes a model for the world. Without showing himself, he shines forth. Without promoting himself, he is distinguished. Without claiming reward, he gains endless merit. Without seeking glory, his glory endures. The sage knows how to follow, so he comes to command. He does not compete, so no one under heaven can compete with him. The ancient saying, "Surrender brings perfection," is not just empty words. Truly, surrender brings perfection, and perfection brings the whole universe. The great Tao flows everywhere. It fills everything to the left and to the right. All things owe their existence to it, and it cannot deny any one of them. Tao is eternal. It does not favor one over the other. It brings all things to completion without their even knowing it. Tao nourishes and protects all creatures, yet does not claim lordship over them. So we class it with the most humble. Tao is the home to which all things return, yet it wants nothing in return. So we call it the greatest. The sage is the same way. He does not claim greatness over anything. He's not even aware of his own greatness. Tell me, what could be greater than this?
I noticed that your translation describes the principle of Taoism as simply Tao, which makes it interchangeable with the word God. Not so much the Tao,
Right.
as Tao. One verse of your translation reads, Tao is limitless, unborn, eternal. It can only be reached through the hidden Creator. Listen to her voice. Hear it echo through creation. Without fail, she reveals her presence. Do you see the characteristics of Tao as similar to the qualities of God?
I see the characteristics of Tao as synonymous with the qualities of God, but the word God is obviously so loaded. It's been so, when I say God and someone else says God, we're not talking about the same thing. So when someone says God and they're talking about the underpinning of everything, the unit, everything, the totality, oneness, onlyness, the actual life itself. That's how some people refer to God, but in the West, it usually refers to some, I call it guy in the sky, somebody in the sky out there, some person who is either a father or we could call, some loving mother or something. That's a different. I'm not sure what that is exactly, but when people say God, they're talking about some person in the sky. There comes a point, in evolution that God becomes nothing less external, but more, your own nature. And so, yeah, it's a process. I mean, we need the intermediary gods, the king gods, at some point. And then, hopefully, whenever we evolve to something that's more consistent with what is actually true.
But you don't see a love of God, a reverence for the divine, as in any way a contradiction to an attempt to embody the Tao.
No, I don't see it as a contradiction. I think it can be limiting if what you're loving is external to yourself, if what you're loving is some person or some image out there. But
you mean almost to deny one's own divine dimension?
Right. If I need a God, if that's out external to my own nature, that blocks me from actually seeing my own nature. But I think in many ways it's a good stepping stone. It's a way. We need to, first you fear God, then you love God, then you are God. So there's a natural progression that takes place as we evolve. But the Tao can accommodate. The Tao accommodates all of it. The Tao says, you want to fear God? Fine. You want to love God? Fine. You want to hold your own nature as one with God? Fine.
It is a subtle paradox to both acknowledge a need for a higher power and to recognize that we contain that power within us.
It's like if I'm praying for something, oh God, grant me, enlightenment, grant me, I'm already acknowledging that I don't have that. Anytime I do an affirmation, oh, please give me something, why am I praying for something to God? It's an acknowledgement that I'm missing that very thing. So in an ironic way, I'm reinforcing my own lack. It's not, at the end of the day, it's not about attaining anything. I mean, it's about noticing this is the hardest thing to realize is, and the Tao keeps saying it's everywhere, it's to notice another part of yourself that's just overlooked. We see what the mind shows us, but there's another dimension to our being that's constantly being overlooked. And the whole Tao is trying to gently point you towards, it's not saying you need to attain it, it's just you need to start noticing it, start to hanging out with it, living it. And it's very, very frustrating to an intellectual mind to kind of, but that's really the path. It's the path of allowing the mind, but also just holding another dimension of yourself. You don't have to get rid of, a lot of people with enlightenment are so afraid, the only way I can attain this is if I go off to some ashram and take some vows. And nowadays people realize that that's a whole fantasy. It's already here, and it's a question of simply noticing, what's already present. And it's very, very difficult because we've been trained again and again to see only what the mind is showing us.
Again, it's that fish looking for the very water that it's swimming in already.
And that's the Tao, that water, that ocean that we're swimming in. I have some translations in this book. This is from verse 14. Eyes look but cannot see it. Ears listen but cannot hear it. Hands grasp but cannot touch it. Beyond the senses lies disunity, invisible, inaudible, intangible. What rises up appears bright. What settles down appears dark. Yet in truth there is neither darkness nor light, just an unbroken dance of shadows, from nothingness to fullness, and back again to nothingness. This formless form, this imageless image, cannot be grasped by mind or might. Try to face it. In what place will you stand? Try to follow it. To what place will you go? Know that which is beyond all beginnings, and you will know everything right here and now. Know everything in this moment, and you will know the eternal Tao.
Jonathan Starr in Princeton, New Jersey, reading from his evocative English translation of Tao Te Ching, the ancient masterpiece of Chinese wisdom by Lao Tsu. You're listening to Humankind. I'm David Freudberg. For more about this topic and to obtain an audio download of our program, The Way of Tao, please visit humanmedia.org. As we've discussed, Tao Te Ching has been rendered into many dozens of English versions. Some attempt a literal translation from the original Chinese, but others offer a different kind of interpretation, such as the Tao of Leadership by the late John Hyder. He was a therapist and longtime member of the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California. John's book framed the principles of Lao Tsu into a richly insightful guidebook for people wishing to apply the Taoist concepts to life in organizations. I met John Hyder at his home in Lawrence, Kansas.
Our technology has never been equaled in the world. The complexity of our lives is phenomenal. I need continual reminding to return to simplicity, not to complicate my life, to take time for being in everyday life, to observe Sabbath or Shabbat in my everyday life. Because when I fail to return to the simplicity of Taoism, I get caught up. I get lost. I get bewildered by the modern world. A concrete example is I don't drive a car much. I drive a car about 5,000 miles a year. It would be hard for me to lead a life in which I drove a car 15 or 20,000 miles a year. And I don't get much support from the culture around me for walking most places or not using a car much. And Lao Tsu and Taoism gives me that support. The most famous symbol of Taoism is that familiar yin-yang sign, the circle with the S in it, and one side's black and one side's light. And that yin-yang sign that has become so familiar is illustrating the point that all creation consists of a dance of opposites, and that everything holy is paradoxical. And by paradoxical, I mean the coexistence of opposites. So, for example, who is the richer person? The one with lots of possessions and lots of debt and lots of things to look after, or the person leading a simpler life with plenty of free time and with relatively few things to be responsible for? Everything I own also owns me, because I must care for it. And so paradoxically, the freer person is the person with fewer needs.
And the person who can recognize all of the worth in what already is there.
Absolutely. An example from my life has been the very deep lesson. I live in a plain state in the middle of the country. We have no beautiful oceans or stunning mountains.
Here in flat Kansas.
Here in flat Kansas. For me, it's been very important to discover the deep beauty in the ordinary landscape, in the plains. For me to want to live in the most stunningly beautiful parts of the country would involve enormous expense and complexity in my life, if nothing more, the price of real estate. So paradoxically, learning that the trees and the clouds, the grass growing and the birds singing, has as much intrinsic beauty as the dramatic mountains and the ocean crashing on the rocks beneath the cliff, is freedom to find beauty in the ordinary.
Because if we can cultivate an ability to find contentment anywhere, we can take that with us everywhere.
And you know and I know that we live in a consumer-driven, media-dominated environment, and a big purpose of both the media, of advertising, of consumerism, of our economy, is to keep us unsatisfied and always needing, making us think we need more beautiful things, people, and places. To learn to be satisfied, to be content in a context, in a social environment of so many messages that we should not be satisfied, that is an art, that is a discipline.
It's really a skill we have to work at developing.
Yes, we have to work at developing, and it probably takes years to get the flu shot that immunizes us from always wanting a newer car or a bigger house.
A theme that runs through this whole philosophy and runs through it like a river is to go with the flow. Even when life situations are hard, to remember that nature's way is to balance things gradually. The problems regulate themselves eventually. As you put it in the book, learn to trust what is happening. If there is silence, let it grow. Something will emerge. If there's a storm, let it rage. It will resolve into calm.
The goal is not just to love the sunny days and hate the storm. It's to understand that all weather is process, that the seasons are process. It doesn't matter if I like one and dislike the other. I'm to learn to be interested in the unfolding process, no matter whether it's sunny or a storm. It's the same way with happiness. The goal of our work in Taoism is not to be happy, it's to lead a meaningful and conscious life through happy times and sad. Every life will have tragedy, every life will have loss, every life will have sadness, and it's for me to be present on those grim and stormy days also, and to learn from that side of life.
In part because the deepest lessons sometimes arise at those trying times.
What the people in 12-step programs speak of as let go and let God, or what we sometimes call living in process, to allow things to evolve.
Is there a danger of leading too passive of a life?
We need a balance between doing and being, between yin and yang. If a person goes all the way overboard into a life of being and passivity and allowing, that life will be no more healthy than a life of doing, busy, a workaholic's life. Somehow we must learn to balance. The example of a sailboat comes to mind. I am not sailing the boat when I simply lie back and look at the sun. Sailing the boat is a continual matter of balancing my hand on the tiller, my hand on the main sheet, the forces of nature, of doing, being, because otherwise the boat will simply drift away. But if I try to over-control the boat, it probably will tip over. I must cooperate with the force of nature in a continual dance.
One observation that Lao Tsu, in his book Tao Te Ching, keeps returning to is the power of silence as a source of understanding and healing. That in a conflict, if a person can get inwardly quiet, much clarity will come. As Lao Tsu put it, those who know don't talk. Those who talk don't know.
I believe it can be said of our culture, and perhaps of most cultures, that we reflect too little on what we've seen before we act on it. Of course, there will be times when I must act on the spur of the moment in emergencies, but the vast majority of my life is not an emergency. It almost never hurts to take time for reflection, to sleep on it, and then see what is the wisdom.
And it's very hard to stay silent.
If I am to have stillness in my life, I must take action. I must have discipline. I must say no to the world. It's for me to set aside time, to be quiet with myself, to have uncommitted time. It's for me to set aside time to be quietly together with my partner or my family. It's for me to set aside days. Sabbath exists in every major world path, and the reason for that is the universal recognition that without being time, I will become ill from too much doing. There is a central concept that we have within us a higher and deeper self. This could be called the Buddha nature, it could be called the Christ within, it could be called my higher self. Part of my task in living is to know how to access this higher self so that I can live in accordance with its wisdom. It is my higher self that knows how to heal me when I am hurt. It is my higher self that grows me, that teaches me how to live in a really fruitful, growing way. And it is my higher self that leads me to those moments of self-transcendence, those spiritual epiphanies, those peak experiences. There can be no deeply meaningful Taoism or any other path of life, any other way of life, that does not offer me some means of contacting my higher self so that I can grow and live more fully in the spirit.
And is that means of contacting the higher self primarily one of inner listening?
Yes, you're back to the theme of silence. I need time to be silent and to listen to my inner voice. It is that inner voice that will write the poems of my life. Leonard Cohen said, "If I knew where the songs came from, I would go there more often." I've always loved Leonard Cohen, and I love that insight.
The late John Hyder, therapist and author of an interpretation of Lao Tsu's classic of Chinese wisdom, the Tao of Leadership. You're listening to Humankind. I'm David Freudberg. Studio recording by Antonio Oliart-Rose. Editorial assistance from Ken Rogers, Kathy Graham, Mark Kilstein, and Bond Collard. Webmaster Brian K. Johnson. Special thanks to Laura Carlo, to David Hopkins of the Princeton University Broadcast Center, and to Tony Buck. Our program is presented by Human Media in association with Connie Goldman Productions. Program development provided by Shart Media.
To purchase a CD copy of this program, please call 1-800-5LISTEN. That's 1-800-5LISTEN. Or visit our website, where you can also obtain an audio download of this and our other programs and can hear selected episodes free. You can access free written materials related to this program as well. Our web address is humanmedia.org. Again, if you'd like to purchase a CD copy of Humankind by phone, please call 1-800-5-LISTEN, and our web address is humanmedia.org.
This segment, part 2 of The Way of Tao, is Humankind program number 230.
The executive producer is David Freudberg. This is Humankind.
To hear more episodes of Humankind, you can subscribe to our free podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or your preferred podcast player. A new episode each week. The podcast title is Humankind on Public Radio. And if you enjoy this program, be sure to leave us a kind review at iTunes and Stitcher. If you want to support the program, please visit humanmedia.org. And at the top of the homepage, click on How You Can Help. Again, our web address is humanmedia.org. Thanks.